30 seconds because there are really important people up here. So I run an organization called Florida Watch. We try to build and hold elected officials accountable by working with partner organizations, C4 organizations, aligning elected officials to build a more just and equitable state. We do that through public opinion research, polling, qualitative research, talking to voters, producing visual content, message guidance for folks who pass the media to try to build a popular, progressive narrative of the state.
Amazing. Hi everyone, it's great to share space with you. Thank you. My name is Eskamani. My pronouns are she or hers, and many folks know me as a state representative. I get to serve alongside this one in the legislature. Sometimes you're the only two no votes or yes votes on different bills, but I was first elected in the Florida legislature back in 2018, so I'm completing year 6, and of course will be terming out in 2 years. I come to you from the 407, so I'm in the Orlando area. Before I ran for office, I worked at Planned Parenthood, Southwest and Central Florida, so I have a background in reproductive rights, health, and freedom. But one reason why I was invited to join out today is about 2 years ago, myself and one of my really good friends, Raymond McGuire, we launched an organization called People Power for Florida to really try to galvanize efforts on voter registration in our state and youth empowerment. And so you might see us in different communities. We actually hosted a youth organizing boot camp at UNF a few months ago. And so really our main focus is those 2 tiers, voter registration and voter empowerment. And we do have a small but mighty team of 2 full-time staff and then a team of organizing fellows who are college students that are bringing voter registration to their college campuses and also trying to inspire our young people to turn their passion into strategic action, like you're talking about today. And I just really believe in the power of youth organizing. I do feel like people are going to save us, but it's so important for us to make sure that they're supported and they have the tools to do that. And I also, of course, have a day job. That's actually not a paid position for me. I raise money for People Power, but I have a day job in the nonprofit sector separate to that. So like many elected officials, we wear many, many hats. And with that, I'm just honored to share space with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Genesis Robinson. I have,
Genesis!
I serve with Equal Ground. Equal Ground is a Black-led voting rights organization. We work to increase civic engagement throughout the state of Florida, particularly in Black communities. We were founded because there didn't really exist a Black-led, Black-labored, Black-focused organization to really be intentional about civic engagement for Black people in the state of Florida. And so we're actually celebrating 5 years this year. And we work to increase civic engagement through voter registration and voter preparedness. Obviously, strategic planning and leadership development, but most importantly, voter education. And so right now, we're actually on tour throughout the state of Florida, where we're traveling to educate folks about what took place during the legislative session. And so voter education is very important to us because we believe that an informed voter is an engaged voter. And that's the work that we do at Equal Ground.
So hey y'all, I am Angie Nixon. I wear a ton of hats. I'm super honored to be here with you all today. I see folks that I do work with. And I realize that I wear a ton of hats and people don't really know that I do have a day job. And what I do. So not only am I a state rep that is serving alongside this awesome happy warrior, Rep. Eskamani, but I am also the executive director of Florida for All. So Florida for All is a statewide coalition. We're really not just a coalition, we're actually a statewide alignment group that works to help align progressive organizations to build co-governing power across the state of Florida. We are located in over 11 counties across the state. As you all heard earlier, we have Shanae Jackson, who's our organizing director in the room. And so we actually convene spaces much like this today, and to folks to come together and to kind of plan out the theory of change locally and how people can win and build power. And so like one of the things that we've done over in Eskamani's neck of the woods, we have a TLC table there that kind of helped lead the charge as it relates to rent stabilization campaign, in which they won rent stabilization, then it got tied up in the courts, and then our wild and crazy colleagues preempted it, right? We're currently over there doing some medical debt work as well. We just won that in Orange County with one of our core partners. We are comprised of 6 organizations as far as like being a part of our board, but we have many external partners. But the 6 main organizations are Florida Rising, SEIU Florida, Florida Immigrant Coalition, Central Florida's Jobs with Justice, and Dream Defenders. And so before that, it was Florida New Majority or New Florida Majority and Organized Florida, but they merged. And so I am proud of that organization. We work alongside everybody up here, like legit everyone up here. And just super excited to be with you all today. And with that, I will go, and that's funny because one of your people, Josh, is calling me right now. But let's get started. Let's jump into it. So a lot of the solutions and action items and next steps came out of these different groups. They were similar in nature. So can y'all tell me, like, let's be real, let's like get into it, because I'm an organizer, I gotta agitate and just be real and lay things out on the table. What is stopping us from actually working together to accomplish these goals? And how do we overcome it?
Yeah, so, one of the things that we talked about at our group, which was here to my right, is, the reality that everybody wants the credit, right? And so we know that, sometimes that is a deterrent to getting people to work together. But also, one of the things that we brought up in our session is that, we need to make the ask, right? And we need to have something for people to do. And we need to give people an opportunity to come in and have shared input early, right? Too oftentimes we create plans and we create visions, and then we go to folks and say, hey, we want you to tap into this plan that's already been created, right? What does it look like to have a room such as this where you're collaborating and you're building and you're planning alongside other people to give them input, right? And when folks have input, they tend to, go harder or something, right? Because they had a hand in helping create it. And so I think, being more collaborative when you're creating the plan helps make a difference in terms of engagement and people actually running with the plan.
Yeah, I'll add to that point. Consensus building is essential. Many leaders are hesitant to engage in consensus building because it can delay action, which candidly is typically true, because when you do have more people in a space, it takes more time to figure it out, to share feedback, receive feedback. But to Janice's point, when you build that consensus, then the plan is more secure, it's more stable. I don't know if y'all did any project management, tips and tricks, but I'm a big fan of MOCA as a project management tool, and it's an acronym that stands for Manager, Owner, Consultant, Helper, and Approver. So when you have a big project or multiple tasks to assign out, you have time to say, okay, whose lane is what, so no one feels like this person's stepping over me or I'm stepping over them, because you have time to map out everyone's responsibilities. In addition to this point, I will add that I do think resources are a challenge. We are always under-resourced, especially compared to our opposition. I know this is not a partisan space, but just to give you some real talk, every single candidate who runs for the Republican ticket for Florida House, regardless if it's a seat they could even win, or if they're a viable candidate, they will get an automatic $50,000 donation from the Republican Party of Florida. It comes maybe 2 weeks after qualifying, just drops their bank account. That's the max they can receive from their party, and they get the max. As you can imagine, we don't have that type of resource on our side, so we don't get that type of seed grants. And so we're always going to be under-resourced. And when you work in a space where you feel that resources are scarce, it leads to competition, it leads to ignoring each other versus working together, because it absolutely comes down to this notion of who gets credit, but I think it also can turn down to, well, if I work with this person, then we're going to have to split resources, and then I won't be able to maintain what I want to do. I think we have to reverse that mentality, because you might feel like there's scarcity of resources, but I think the real scarcity is time. When we have an election that's coming up, every minute we lose, we are 1 second closer to that election day. That is more of a scarcity to me than the dollar. And we do so much when we come together that no one can actually buy. People are always trying to buy what we're building. So just build, but also get out of your comfort zone. Reach out to organizations that you might not typically think would be interested in partnering, and you'd be surprised, how many folks want to help. And also, when we talk about resources, don't think that every person you call needs to donate $1,000. Ask them for $10. Help that commitment come in different forms and different shapes. Build that bigger need. And the last point I'll make to that too is when we talk about collaboration and consensus building, to really think about too, when it is my time to step back, right? To let your team lead. A good leader creates new leaders. So what are you doing to also build that long-term pipeline and just share those resources? Another quick example, back in my district, we have a lot of amazing folks who are running for different positions of political office, and our districts overlap. So instead of an environment where we're each gonna knock on doors, the same Saturday and host 3 separate canvases, we decided to work together. And we created this trifecta walk card that has a school board candidate, me, and a state senate candidate. And we were just doing these canvases together. So all 3 of us worked to boost the attendance for those events so we can knock more doors and do it all in one swoop. And I will say, there's that phrase when you do it alone versus do it together. If I did those canvases alone, I probably could tackle more doors in a short period of time because the conversations would be shorter. But again, when we do it together, those conversations are deeper, they're more meaningful. And it might take me a little bit longer to finish that precinct, but it's gonna be worth it because we finished it for 3 people in 1 attempt versus all 3 of us splitting up those resources and doing things separately. So to also kind of brainstorm and think about, well, where can we work together to tackle this versus having all our resources be split up and thus not be as impactful.
So I'm last, so they all took all my ideas. But seriously, what I think about often is we are in an ecosystem, informational ecosystem where there's a lot of bullshit, excuse my language, flowing all the time. There's constant chaos in our society. Some of that, a lot of it's by design, right? And what we have to do, how we are successful is consensus. Not fighting over credit, coming up with a shared vision of what we want to achieve. And sometimes it can't be this massive, big, everything we're fighting on. We have to sometimes choose specific battles because over the last few years, there's a lot of things that have happened in the state that are incredibly unpopular that have been done by people in power. And now we have an opportunity to focus on those things, those specific things. We have a remedy on the ballot to fix one of those. We have elections where we can vote out people who did things that are harmful, like my 50% property insurance renewal I just got, or my 35% car insurance renewal. Those things happen because of the people we chose to elect. So we have specific areas that we can focus on, that we can organize around, that maybe we won't have as much resources, but we can organize and motivate volunteers, people to get together to fight on those issues. And those issues, although we may only be talking about 2 or 3 issues, they're gonna resonate at a much larger level because we're talking about things that people actually give a damn about, not some, baloney culture war situation, the most recent scare. And so those are things that we should think about is how do we come together and agree on things that we care about, we're gonna organize around, that we can make a difference on and change things and inform people on over this election cycle.
Thank you for that. Really, really good. So, appreciate you all talking about that scarcity mindset. because it is kind of somewhat rampant within our spaces now, especially since people don't think Florida is hot and sexy anymore.
It's still hot.
Just maybe not as sexy as some people want to say. That's funny, just what I'm saying. But like, I want to kind of like dig a little deeper into what you stated, Josh, right? So going back to like, how do we push through the scarcity mindset and like lift up our abilities to work together and areas that we can work together on? Like, what's another step, right? Because I know you talked a little bit about communications, right? Like in a shared communications work. Like, what else can we possibly do together in a time where funding ain't flowing like it should? We know that money may come in for the abortion initiative, but like it's probably gonna come after August and in September. And like, what do we do now to be able to work together to push through that scarcity mindset?
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
I think it starts with, sort of coming up with a unified narrative, talking about our values, leading with our values. I think generally speaking, everyone in this room probably has a handful of yours, probably all have a handful, maybe a few values that are sort of guiding principles to your organization, whether it's freedom, equality, justice. And so, using those values, and then taking a look at what, folks care about in the state and sort of, leaning into those, right? So like, I think about, this unified message of like, we're fighting back to get our freedom back, right? Right now, women of reproductive age in the state don't have the freedom to make decisions about their health care. That is a popular idea to return that right. And I think that's something we all can unite around. There are other issues, right? Whether it's fighting for fair wages, a few years ago we passed the minimum wage. There really are these opportunities where we can align on critical issues and keep it simple. I mean, there are so many issues out there that we can focus on, but it's hard with limited resources to tackle everything and do everything. And so if we narrow focus in on things that we can fight for, whether it's like, working on a school board race here in Duval County and saying, okay, all right, we all agree that this district X is really important. Well, there's 15 of us organizations here. We can work on educating the public around how these candidates stand on these two issues, and if all 15 organizations focus on that school board district, we can have an outcome, whether it's a partisan outcome when we decide we're going to advocate for one candidate, or it's just making sure that the population is informed on the issue of like where they stand on issues, right? And so I think it's being smart and scaling to what you can do and what you can tackle and making sure that you get a win, right? Getting W's on the board is really helpful from a mental standpoint of doing this work. We often feel like we're running into a wall, and it's really nice to get wins, and that's really important.
Yeah, so I'll add 2 quick thoughts to that. One is, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. And then 2 is, we have to have fun while doing it. Okay. Right? And we're all about joy here. And so I'll tackle the first point first. So don't reinvent the wheel. I saw a lot of this after 2016 when Trump won the presidency, right? You saw all this great, amazing energy. But a lot of folks, instead of getting plugged into some of the historic organizers and folks who were already on the ground, who just with a little bit of extra TLC could really scale up their efforts, you saw folks say, well, I'm gonna do my own thing, and I'm gonna go, and sometimes you have to because there are gaps. I mean, Equal Ground is a perfect example of that. Clear gap. Before Equal Ground came, there was no organization that was Black-led, Black labor, leading on these issues. But there's also a lot of works, for example, the reproductive rights space, and that's, of course, below my background. And so I would see folks who say, well, I want help in this way, and it's like, okay, great, we have an abortion fund that needs you. They need new board members, they need more resources, and I want to do my own thing here. And a lot of cases, that new thing doesn't last because that person, unfortunately, doesn't have leadership training, they don't have access to other resources, they have a great passion, but they weren't willing to join what's already happening, the infrastructure we're trying to build. So I do think it's really important when you're talking to folks who want to get more involved. I have these coffee meetings, especially with young people all the time. Even this morning, I met with someone who is a first-year law student who came from Cuba, and so she wants to get more involved. And my advice to her was, well, what are you interested in? Okay, here are organizations that are doing that work to get you plugged in too. And if there is an organization, then you can maybe think, okay, I gotta invent something. But I can't tell you how many times people reinvent things, and it's like, now we're split up again. Now you have another C3 that does the same thing that C3 did, and it's like, okay, now you can find new board members and raise more money from the same places, and it's just this vicious cycle of just, silos. So I think we do have to be a little bit critical about, where do we, again, time being that currency, where do we put our time into this work? And with that point made, I don't want to just speak to this as the literal of organizational structure. We also don't want to reinvent strategy. We know what it takes to register people to vote. We know what it takes. We need the extra people to do it. We need the extra resources to do it. You have the Comms Hub, they know how to do good polling, but they need money to do good polling. And I often also have groups come to me and say, well, I want to do a focus group on XYZ, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting, we already did that. Let me show it to you, right? Because there's a lot of well-meaning folks who have a lot of assumptions because they just are not in the space to understand everything. And so we should not only welcome those new voices, but ensure that there's some level setting. So there's understanding of, what are the organizations, who's doing what, and where would be the best way for you to get plugged in, and what would be the best strategy based on our history that we know works to keep doing it. I think sometimes we feel like we don't have a strategy because in Florida we have had a lot of losses, but I would argue some of those losses are because we're not making decisions based on good strategy. And that gets to my second point about having fun. Oh my God, politics right now is incredibly polarizing, and it's a whole different topic that we can tackle, but understandably so that people are very frustrated, very demoralized. But even when we're frustrated, we have to have joy. We have to find moments of joy. I do believe that the answer to despair is action, but that action should be filled with love, with dance, with music, with a sense of jubilation and solidarity. We had so many bad days on the House floor, but I feel so grateful that I get to get off that fucking floor and then share space with my colleagues, right? Share space with my community to be able to vent while also crack a couple of jokes, and make fun of DeSantis' heels. I want to be able to do that, right? And I mean, there was an article today about RFK having a worm in his brain. Politics is weird, and we should be able to talk about that. And I think people want. It reminds me of the 2008 Obama campaign, which is my very first campaign ever. I was 18 years old in 2008. And I feel very blessed to have an exciting campaign, one of my first ones. Because the energy there was on fire, right? And we really have to rebuild that momentum. And we're not going to find it from someone else. It's not going to come from the Biden administration, right? We have to build it ourselves at a hyper local level. And I do think we have the capacity to do that.
And you'll have to forgive me, I just celebrated my 35th birthday last week, so I forgot the question.
Now you got me feeling like I forgot the question. I want to get into his perspective though. How do we work together and cut through the things as it relates to this scarcity mindset? What can we do together to
Got it. All right. Now that I have a question, one of the things I think that we can do to work together a little bit better is recognizing that we all can play a role, right, in the work that needs to be done. Oftentimes, it doesn't necessarily have to be on everybody to do everything. I said earlier, I view civic engagement as a puzzle, right? And so if you have someone that's focused on people voting and turnout, then maybe somebody else is focused on the education piece. Maybe somebody else is focused on the accountability piece. Maybe somebody else is focused on keeping folks engaged and informed around what is taking place and things that they need to know, right? So I think when we view the task and the responsibility of what we can do in a small sense, right, it doesn't become overwhelming to make us feel as if we're trying to attack some huge mountain, right? You take your small piece and you work on it that way. Another thing that I think we can do better is share resources, right? Each of our organizations has a certain expertise. We may have trainings, we may have information that we have that could benefit another organization, particularly smaller organizations. That's one thing that we pride ourselves in at Eagle Ground, is making sure that we share out resources that we have, and expertise that we have, information that we gather from other people, and we make it available. We do, during legislative session, we do a weekly newsletter. Outside of that, we do a monthly newsletter. And that newsletter is not just filled with content from us, right? We're sharing Josh's, information. We're sharing stuff from the representatives. Anything that we think people could benefit from and take. And people say, oh, well, they'll say, well, is it okay if I share your stuff? It's like, no, absolutely you can share it. It's not, just for you. We want to get it out to the masses. So I think anytime that there's an opportunity to do shared trainings or shared resources, we should certainly take advantage of that, because it makes a difference versus you having to expend money to do things, polling data, research, list, all type of things that you're able to share with others. I think helps.
Thank you. Should I check your phone? Sorry. Heard that it's hard getting certain groups to the polls. It's hard to convince people because they're apathetic and things like that, right? And so I want to know, what are some good ideas or solutions? What have you seen that's worked in the past to cut through? Hold on, what did you say? Because there's a bunch of bullshit that. Sorry, y'all. Any religious folks, I apologize. To Josh's point, there's a bunch of BS and disinformation and things like that. And how do we get people to the polls, especially if we're not winning, right? And then how do we, second part, how do we keep our groups and our membership motivated? Because we're putting in work. We're just underfunded and things like that. So what can we do to reset? And then what can we do to also get those apathetic folks involved and realizing that we can win?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we can do is, first of all, build relationships and educate people, right? Let people know what's going on. My grandmother has a saying that people would do better if they knew better. And the reality is the lack of engagement is not necessarily because people don't care all the time, but it's sometimes they're not really aware of what is taking place, right? Obviously, that we live in a state where we have challenges, and that's to put it mildly, right? But to understand the complexity of that, and for example, the impact of what happens when you don't do certain things. I'll use redistricting for an example, right? I view the 2018 gubernatorial race as probably the most consequential race, not only in the history of our state, but potentially for the nation, right? When you think about a race that enabled a person to get into office who was able to appoint Supreme Court justices, who allowed an unconstitutional map to move forward, which eliminated black representation from Congress, which changed our congressional delegation from 14 to 13 in favor of Republicans to 20 to 8 in favor of Republicans, which then delivered a majority to the Republican Party in Congress, right? That is a moment for you to educate people just how important a gubernatorial election is, because all those things were able to happen because Ron DeSantis was able to win by less than 33,000 votes, right? And so that is critical. And so I think we have to educate people about that. I think we have to, lean in on the reality of what happens when we don't engage. What happens when we do engage, for the good and the bad. The other point of that I'll say is, and I brought this up earlier in our conversation, we have to, not only tell the story of when we have wins, right, but we have to celebrate the victory that we have when we get close. It may not have been the result that we wanted, but we have to celebrate the fact that we're making progress. Because in 2018, I'm going back to the gubernatorial race, 2018 came within 33,000 votes of, having someone who shares our values in the governor's mansion. 4 years later, in 2022, you have a person who came within 33,000 votes of losing, win by 1.5 million votes. How does that happen? How does that happen, right? And it happens because you have folks who are apathetic. They said, we didn't get our result. They went home, they pouted, they were upset. But the reality is, when you come within that close, now you say, what can I do to go even further, right? What can we do to redouble our commitment and double our efforts? We knocked 20,000 doors in 2018, we're not knocked 40,000 in 2022, right? And so I think we have to lean in when we have that progress. We may not get the victory from an electoral standpoint, but we have to look at the other metrics and ways that we've made progress and continue to build upon that.
So I want to echo everything Genesis just said, and just listening to his feedback and thoughts on this, and maybe think of a few things, and I have to write it down because I want to forget. So one is this, first of all, and y'all have talked about this and y'all experienced it. There's so many assumptions made about people of color and about young people. As a person of color myself and a young person, over the years, volunteering on political campaigns or meeting new candidates where it breaks down into a way too simple perspective that, I'm going to talk to a group of Latinos, let's only talk about immigration. And I'm talking to a group of African Americans, let's only talk about criminal justice and voting rights. And if I'm talking to young people, I'm only going to talk about student debt or climate change. Like all these kind of assumptions made about different demographics of people. And it's like, well, actually, there are some issues that all of us care about. The economy, we all care about the rising cost of housing. None of us can afford rent right now. Our property insurance is out of control. So there actually are some really great universal issues that we can tackle together. But what I see happen time and time again are these DC and sometimes Tallahassee-based consultants who just give terrible advice and are making assumptions about our people. And no wonder folks don't feel like they want to vote, right? Because why would you? You have someone who comes into your church or comes into your community center, you've never met them before, and they're telling you, yeah, you should vote for me because, I'm going to write stereotype, right? I'm going to do this for this community. And most times they don't even actually do it. So we have a lot of trust we have to rebuild. And I know that as an elected official myself, I've inherited a broken system that is a lot of baggage. And I talked to so many different groups of people, and most recently I spoke to a group at UCF, and the professor who invited me, he actually was really sweet to share me the evaluation that students gave for the talk. Because most engaged, you don't get a chance to actually be evaluated, right? People just say, good job. They don't know, did I really do a good job? And so these students, their feedback was phenomenal for me to read, because for a lot of them they said, I was really hesitant to listen to a politician. I wasn't sure how I'd feel. I haven't had good experience in the past, but I left feeling a sense of empowerment. She was authentic, she was real with me, she answered my questions, she didn't hide away from things. And so it was very refreshing for me to hear that feedback, but it reinforced a point for me that information is persuasion. And this goes to what Genesis just said. People don't want you to just talk in talking points. I mean, obviously, you have to have the repetition. You want people to leave remembering something, so that's where the comp sub comes in handy, because you need those resources. But when you actually have the time to get to know a group, you're not just giving a 5-minute pitch. You're actually going to take questions from the audience, engage with folks. Information is persuasion. So many of our communities, they are mad at what's happening, but they don't know who to pin the anger towards. They don't know. And when you have the nationalization of our politics, so what do I mean by that? Most of our media is about federal issues. So when you're watching cable news, most of it's about federal, or something that intersects with federal. Most people don't even know they have a state representative. They really don't. Despite the fact that I'm on the ballot now 3 times in my district, and when I do polling, oh, it's such a humbling experience. There's always going to be at least 30% of people who don't know who I am. And I'm like, oh my God, I have raised at least $2 million in campaigning the last 60 years, and people still don't know who I am. In a district of 188,000 people, they don't know who I am. Very humbling, but a reminder, right, that we have to teach people the basic systems of civics. When they're mad about property insurance, it is not Biden. It is literally DeSantis. And to teach them that, right? And also, that education is empowering. Because then they can go from a place of apathy to a place of, I can make a difference. And that's the sweet sauce. Like, that's the magic. So information is persuasion. So don't assume voters don't want to understand how the bill becomes a law, or that they even know that in Florida. Like, you might feel like it's naive information, like, oh yeah, I mean, of course everyone knows that, we all watch Schoolhouse Rock. No, actually, a lot of folks have no idea how a bill becomes a law. They really don't. And when they learn about the process in Tallahassee, it's incredibly eye-opening, right? They're like, aha, like the light bulb goes off. And when they learn about, here's how you can stop a bill, here's how you can help a bill, it is that sense of control, which so many voters just don't have, and they don't feel like they have control, why would they participate, right? I think, so that point is incredibly key. And just to counter the nationalization of politics, we also have to be hyper-local. We have to be hyper-local. So my campaign is not going to talk about national issues. Now, I have to be prepared in case I'm asked a question, right? But when I knock on doors, it's going to be affordability issues. It will be reproductive rights because my district does care about that overwhelmingly, but not every district will. And you just have to accept that. It might be something you care a lot about. I'm not even a homeowner. I'm still a renter, but I champion property insurance, honey. I champion it. And I mean, I'm not ready to buy it yet, thank God. But you know, I'm a renter, so I can speak to those issues, but like, I have to champion things even if I'm not directly impacted. And I think that's really important for all of us to really embrace that notion. It might not even be something that you relate to, but if your community cares about it, center the debate on that, champion that. And it'll help you stand out on your organization, on your issues, but also help cut through the BS.
I think one of the most important things and it's hard after going after Genesis is people want to be heard, and often apathy comes because they feel like the system isn't listening to them. And so what we spend in my organization doing is a lot of time asking people what they care about, right? And then who they blame, right? And sometimes they don't blame anybody, they just think the whole system's corrupt. And so often it's about weaving together a narrative about why their vote's important. When they vote, can they make a difference? It's not gonna fix everything. You can't lie to people, right? You gotta be honest. But there are opportunities when things happen, when you vote, that things do get better. And sometimes they get worse if you don't vote. This example is pretty stark in Florida, where people of reproductive age don't have the right to get an abortion. And that is something we can fix in November, but it's something many people were so fed up with the system, they didn't vote in 2022 because they didn't fully understand that was on the ballot. And so our job is to make that connection and understand that every person you meet in life has a lot of things they're struggling with and going through. And so first listen, have a conversation, hear what they're saying, and figure out how you can take that and connect it to the message you want to deliver. And we all have priorities as organizations, but the best thing you can do is get to a place where you're as close to the voter and what they care about. Because at the end of the day, if they don't hear you listening to them and talking about the thing they care, they're going to tune you out, right? And the best thing you can do as an organization, a volunteer, a canvasser, or just talking to family, is listen to them and try to make an emotional connection there. I'm thinking about this Yes on 4 a lot. My dad's pretty conservative. We don't talk politics much, but I want to get him to vote Yes on 4. Do it. But I also think I'm thinking about how do I do that? He loves my wife, his daughter-in-law. My wife's a doctor as well, and so there's a healthcare aspect to this. But I want him to understand that she doesn't have the same rights as I do in this state now. And if something, God forbid, we want to have a second child, and something was to happen, would he want her to have to flee the state? We have the means to do it, but there are millions of people in the state of Florida that don't. And so that's the case I'm going to make. It's an emotional, it's a relational argument. And so I just want to leave y'all with that, because I think that's a powerful antidote for those people who are gettable. Not everyone's gettable. There's about 10% of Floridians that are just letting go. We don't need that. We need 60%. And so those are the type of things I think about. I also have those conversations with property insurance with my dad. He owns a house. Shit's pissing him off. And I don't think he's voted for a Democrat in like 15 years. And so that itself is another conversation. I just, mentioned mine, and his is up for renewal this summer. And I know, because I work in this, I know his is going to go up. I'm just curious how much it's going to go up. That'll be another conversation about who's responsible for that. So those are the type, we can pick off one voter here and there, family members, friends, just where it's natural. But you can also do that in the doors, right? You just listen to what they're telling you and say, oh, that's interesting. I really empathize with you. Well, let's talk about why we're here, why that happened, and what we want to do to fix that. Back to you, Angie.
And so I'm going to open it up for the audience, because again, they were just talking about having, hearing from folks, making sure people feel heard. So are there any questions in the audience? Nina, then I see Shanae. Y'all are organizers, can you use your organizer voice and project for this?
No, I got it, yeah. So, one of the things that you all touched on a little bit, was resources, and this is one of the things in my purview, as part of a national organization that I see too, right? So idea that people have given up on Florida, not just from a funding perspective, but also say, it's so bad in Florida. But I think that an area that's not being told, and I'm curious what you think about this, and if you're seeing this too, is that Florida's not the only place where these things are happening. But organizers are doing a fantastic job of telling the story of what's happening in Florida, particularly leading up to, I think organizers in Florida ruined DeSantis' presidential campaign.
We got to celebrate our wins. So yes,
that this is a reason to invest more in Florida, because there's a great ground game that actually was able to end the presidential campaign. And then if you just invested more, maybe, we could do more. Yeah. But I'm curious if you see that in your purview and what
No, I certainly agree with that opinion. Florida is, people say Florida is a red state or, purple state. Florida is really just an under-organized state. And if we could really continue to make the case for why there should be investment in Florida, sustained investment in Florida, I think we'll see a difference, right? And going back to the 2018 example, I don't have the exact numbers, but the drop-off in investment from 2018 to 2022 was astronomical, hundreds of millions of dollars. It was ridiculous. And yeah, exactly. And so I think we just have to, continue to make that case, right? I think when we see these two amendments pass this November, I think that will also make the case, right? Because we continue to see progressive ballot initiatives pass, but at the same time, right, we continue to elect several candidates. And I think part of that, you can't just see it in a vacuum. You have to see it for what it is, that these people are getting elected on unconstitutional maps. They're gerrymandered. These people are getting elected through voter suppression, laws that have hugely impacted the ability for people to vote and have access to the ballot box. And so it's not as if, all voters are just saying, hey, we prefer Republican or, conservative policies over, other policies. It's just really things that are happening to create that system and that environment for that to kind of happen.
I have a little history. I like to think about states that have had Republican governors that were really Republican that had Democratic governors. So key states, I think about that. I think about Laura Kelly in Kansas. Kansas is not a blue state, it's a red state. She got elected in 2018. She then ran for re-election on abortion rights and had an abortion amendment on the ballot. And so for me, a lot of that was a backlash to policies in the state where they actually went to 4-day-a-week public education schools. We have a similar phenomenon. I don't know if everyone's plugged in fully about what the state is currently doing to drain the coffers of our public education institutes in the state. What I'm saying here is when you go too far, when you do things that are so out of the mainstream, you end up winning 70% of NPAs in the special election in Orange County. You end up winning the first female mayor of the largest city in the state. Politics is often a reaction to what people are feeling. And so when people can't pay their property insurance anymore and they lose their home, because that's going to happen, or their home gets destroyed and they decide not to rebuild their home in the state, or they decide, I can't afford it, I'm gonna sell my house as soon as possible, which is happening currently in Southwest Florida, these things have repercussions. Our job as organizers is to tell these stories, to lift up these people, put them in front of the public, to show this is the cost of a government that is not responsive to the people, who puts profits above people, who decides that industry in the state of Florida is more important than individuals. We have had a $3 billion, I think it's a $3 billion bailout for insurance companies in Florida, with literally nothing to show except for higher premiums. And so those are things I would say, is we can have a backlash in Florida like you saw in Kansas after they went to a 4-day school week. For example, Louisiana had a Democratic governor for 8 years. Wild to think about. And so these are things, North Carolina had a Democratic governor for the last 8 years in a state that is essentially red-leaning. And so we are not too far gone. We just have to organize, we have to fight, we have to show Floridians what the cost of this leadership is, and it is higher costs for us, less services, and it's like not a good life.
Absolutely. And I don't disagree with any of the comments. I want to just CC everything already said, and I'll just add an additional perspective to it. So I'll use the abortion initiative as an example. So for the Yes on 4 campaign, as it was starting, we could not get any national folks to help us. And in fact, the first 10 million that we raised, like 90% was from Florida donors. National orgs had no interest. In fact, I'm trying to combat national naysayers. Like, I'm on calls, basically trying to push people, like, no, actually, we're doing really good, here's what we're doing. And then, once we collected the petitions within a 6-month period, then the national org said, well, you're not gonna get past the Supreme Court, that's impossible. I mean, I'm having conversations with folks who represent very wealthy funds and very wealthy organizations. And the negativity was just endless. And then once we got through Supreme Court, then they say, okay, well, I get 60%. And it's like, well, we won't if you don't write a check. So like, please write a check. And so I say that because, yes, like the tone is one that we all have to change among ourselves and share that story. But you're also, Nina, hitting on a very important point, that the national funding mechanics are broken. And we have a lot of people who are making these major funding decisions looking at an electoral map that is only federal. They're ignoring some of the other consequences beneath that. And I know that for a fact. I attended a conference, a national conference in Nevada. I was there for about 24 hours in Las Vegas. I did not get married. I was there to speak on a panel about Don't Forget the South. And it was actually, I'm glad I hosted the panel. It was me, it was a Georgia voice, a North Carolina voice, and a Texas voice. And we were there trying to tell these folks, like, here's why the South is worth investing in. But that morning, I sat in on the keynote presentation. It was basically the map of priority states. And we were not a priority state for this organization. I mean, that was before the BIs. I think things have changed. But at that moment, we were not a priority state until, I think it was, when is Rubio up again? 2028? Yeah, 2028. That's when they said, Florida will be a priority in 2028 because they're just looking at the U.S. Senate calendar. They're not looking at all these other factors of like, oh, well, if abortion is banned in Florida, that's like 100,000 people, not just in Florida, who don't have access to care anymore, in the entire Southeast. But they're not measuring that in their analysis. And so, for whatever, any person here is part of it, they would cut off by the national orgs. I was saying any person here that's part of a national organization or has relationships with national organizations, like I really encourage us to challenge their decision-making process. I think that's a part of it too, is you have a lot of well-meaning folks who they do care about winning, but they're so skewed by the way things have been done, which haven't worked, by the way, when they're not willing to reinvent it. Don't reinvent things that are working, but if it's not working, when your investments are not making sense, maybe you should reevaluate how you're making your investments. And so it's grassroots for us, but it's also that top down. We have to manage up and kind of inspire these groups to reevaluate how they're spending their dollars in states.
And we have one more question, but before we move on, we have one more question, then we're gonna wrap on up.
Just real quick, there's like a lot of people in here probably, Floridians, the collective we, and you didn't end with this, we put abortion on the ballot. That's a win. it's been a bad couple of years, and I listened to that whole conversation, I've heard all of that over the last year too myself, and I was like, no, I think we're gonna get these signatures. No, I think this actually can pass. And I was telling a really prominent donor of mine, I think they're gonna approve this. I think it's too overt that if they don't, and I just wanna note, we fucking did that, excuse my language, it means we can do it in November, and that's something really cool and joyful to fight for. And I just wanna take a moment to crystallize what Rep. Eskamani said, because we don't get those moments often, and we should really sit in that and say all right, we did that, now we gotta do more, because we did it, right? Most of that work, almost all of it was done in Florida. It was Floridians, donors, activists, knocking on doors, going to the arts market here in Riverside, setting up a table, getting some people to sign petitions. That was what did it, and we're the only ones that are gonna save ourselves, and if we do it, we're gonna do it in November. And I just wanted to crystallize that, because that story is so powerful, because we overcame that notion on the national level.
That's also a great story to tell, because I don't think a lot of people realize, did y'all know how hard it was? Just the negativity, some folks did, some folks didn't. We couldn't get one national org, even Planned Parenthood, Federation of America, was very hesitant, because there's foundations across the state, so they're looking at across the state. The other indicator for us was Ohio. It was Ohio gets, first of all, people want to give to us because Ohio was happening, which I totally get. That was this past November. But then everyone's waiting to see what happened in Ohio before they gave to Florida. So we just had all these variables that were kind of out of our control, but was really making it harder for us to do this, and yet we still did it. So I think that comeback story is a really good one.
And to that, I want to say that we had a plan though. Folks may not know, but there were organizations across the state that worked together to craft a plan, and we worked together. And so I just want to lift that up, because it seems like if we collectively here in Jacksonville and Duval come up with the plan, we can win, which is what we did with Donna, right? Which is what we did with And also, I know we've started to move in that direction. You also did that similarly during our delegation meetings when all of you came up. It was so many of you all at that delegation meeting. Shout out, and I'm hey, we're all do this. Yes, so we the people. And so we stayed on message. And it's really important for us, to your point, because you asked about funding, funders shouldn't dictate what we do. We should dictate to funders what we want to do. But the only way that we can do that is if we collectively come together with a plan. We all pick our lanes within that plan, right? right? And then we present and tell them what it is, right? And so really quickly, we have one last question.
Y'all actually just
okay.
Y'all actually said it to me and answer my question before I asked.
Okay. It's really not often that Sinead's like speechless. I love my girl though. But with that, I just want to, because we're short on time. I just really want to thank you all. I feel as though like next steps, let's close it out with like one last like call to action from each of you all. I already said it, like we need to get together, like and identify. It doesn't have to be everybody in the room because some of you all are like all a part of an organization, right? Like we can identify people within the organization who's going to represent. We come up with a plan. We come up with how much we need to fund it, right? And we go out and like we win. And even if we don't get the funding, like we come up with a plan. We coordinate precincts or we coordinate this and that, and then like we win. And so I know that sounds really simplified, but it's like it does work, and that's kind of what we did with Donna again. But I want to kick it over to my panelists and say, like, what's your last like takeaway? What do you want to leave folks with before we go?
Yeah, so I had to look this one up because I didn't want to butcher it. So there's a quote that I love, and I think it'll be my closing quote, and it says, "No one can do everything, but everyone can do something, and no one should do anything." So that is sort of what I want to leave you all with, right? We have a collective responsibility to do the work. We have a collective responsibility to work collaboratively because we know that there's so much at stake, and we can't afford to continue to work in silos. We can't afford to continue to not be connected in the struggle and the fight that's ahead of us. Equal ground, like I said, has only been around for 5 years, but I think, when I look at what the next 5 years look like, I know that it is not necessarily solely a continuation of what we've done, right? Each year we try to ramp up and figure out how can we be better, how can we go further, how can we bring more people along, and I think everybody should have that same assessment within themselves, right? What can I do to increase my capacity and my commitment to the work? And so I invite you all to connect with us. If you're not familiar with our organization, we don't have a huge presence in Jacksonville. We do work throughout the state of Florida. We're very intentional about trying to be in places and spaces where you don't necessarily have strong leadership. I mean, we're in Orlando by default because that's where our home base is. But in Jacksonville, we know you got, a legislative champion here in Rep. Nixon, you have Senator Tracy Davis, and so we try to find those other pockets in the state that are often neglected and underrepresented. But I invite you to connect with us on social media. If you text Equal Ground, one word, to 52886, that'll put you on our mailing list and give you a list of resources that we have available. So thank you all, and look forward to connecting with you in the future.
So I'm really worried that when historians write about the history of planet Earth, humans are not going to be the protagonists. and we have the power to change that in this room, to actually be the heroes or the sweet, sweet place that we call home here in Florida. And so, of course, I echo, getting plugged in, but I'm going to be really short and sweet. I want everyone, once you leave this space, look through your phone or your email or your Instagram and identify 5 people that should have been here. 5 people that you think would have benefited from being in this room. And reach out to them and say, hey, I was just thinking about you. I attended this really cool space. I met these awesome people. And it made me think of something you might want to be interested in. I'm going to go to this event next week. Do you want to join me? Because rooms like this are powerful, but I want you to imagine what it would be like if 5 of your friends came, right? And if it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So I'm gonna ask you to just go through your phone later today, check in with some folks that you haven't talked to in a while, and just say, I was in this really cool space, and it made me think of you, and I wanna invite you to join me next time, right? And please do that. First of all, it's just nice to check in with folks in your life, but go back to this point of relational organizing. That is relational organizing. And so I really encourage you to do that when you get out of here today.
We gotta do better, and we need to show a vision of what it looks like. It's worth fighting for. And so I would just say, like, we can reclaim certain values from the right, like freedom, and we should. Because really, when you think about it, our vision of the world is a vision where you have the freedom to live a healthy life, that you have a freedom to have a good job, freedom to make your own decisions about your body and your family, and we really need to make a point of fighting back on that universal, like it's like 95% of Americans like freedom. I don't know who 5% don't, but we have often seeded that in spaces, and I think over the last couple of years, particularly led by the reproductive rights movement, have done a really good job. There's a reason why the ballot initiative campaign is called Florida Games Protecting Freedom, because that's what it's literally doing. And we should be the standard bearers of that. We should carry that fight for freedom over the next 6 months, because a lot of the progress that's been made over the last 60 years has been for that fight for freedom. When you look back to the civil rights movement, reproductive rights movement, LGBTQ rights movement, and it's really imperative on us to carry that banner for the next 6 months.
So that is our panel, but also just when we call y'all, pick up and show up. Thank you for having us.